Good afternoon. My name is Cécile Brossard, and I am a book and paper conservator at the BNF in Paris. It's a pleasure for me to be with you today and to talk about a Syriac binding from the 16th century. And I would like to share with you the surprises I had during its restoration. Right. We can begin by giving you some characteristics of Syriac manuscripts. Today, it is estimated that there are about 10,000 Syriac manuscripts, but all the books are not listed yet. They are mainly present in monasteries located in the Middle East, and in Europe, the largest collection is in the Vatican Library. In Western collections, the majority are rebound books. Colophons give precious information, and the method of production has not changed during 15 centuries. Unfortunately, there are very few publications about Syriac bindings, so I will try to add my contribution today. This diagram sums up and presents the BNF collection. There are no original bindings, but we have a hope with the binding I present today. At the BNF, we have 438 Syriac manuscripts, only 30 Syriac bindings, and the oldest dates from the 16th century. My presentation focuses on the Syriac 402, which was bought in Aleppo, Syria in 1900, and it entered in the BNF collections following a donation in 1991. I have divided my talk into 5 parts. At first, I will start with a short presentation of the Syriac 402. Then I will show you the degradations. After that, the surprises I met during this dismantling. And before suggesting a chronology of the different treatments, I will present you its restoration. The text. Without decoration is a gospel written in the 13th century, and the colophon specifies it was restored and rebound in the 16th century. We agree that the word restored refers to the repair of the missing folios, their rewriting, and the current bindings. The manuscript was produced in a monastery at Edessa, which is today named Urfa in Turkey. Before undertaking the restoration, a work meeting took place at the BNF with several specialists and colleagues. Unfortunately, the advanced state of degradation didn't allow a minimal repair, and the decision was difficult. But finally, the most appropriate treatment was to dismantle the binding and to resew and rebind the manuscript. All the techniques used were respectful of the former techniques and of ethical recommendation. And of course, a complete report was written with a lot of photographs. Let's now look at the condition of the book when it was entrusted to the workshop. The covering is made with a dark brown tanned leather, which is very smooth and shiny as if it was varnished. It was not analyzed, but it is likely a goat skin. A typed note, dating probably from the middle of the 20th century, was glued on the back cover. The spine has been rebacked with a sheepskin leather, which was in a very bad condition, and the missing area has been filled at the joint with several levels of papers. The covering was damaged at the edges, joints, and corners, but the worst is that it was broken and the backboard was detached. The end papers are not original, and the watermark can possibly be dated from the 17th century. Each flying end paper is glued on the last folio of the first and the last gatherings. We can see some inscription underneath, but it was impossible to separate the sheets. At the end of the book, a modern note gives information about the colophon, and all around we can notice stains corresponding to the leather turn-ins. Although the wood was not analyzed, there's a lot to say about the very thick boards. The binding presents no squares, and the boards are shaped only at the shoulders. Several clues show that we are faced with reused boards. You can see 2 holes in the middle of the boards, as well as on the edges. The fastening have disappeared, but the boards present traces like two couples of holes on the inside and a peg on the fore-edge. 5 drillings in the straight line correspond to each station of the sewing with 3 threads, and there are 3 drillings at head and tail for the end bands. A careful examination shows a textile trace which may correspond to former textile end leaves. And at last, concerning the leather, it seemed that the irregular turn-ins were held in place by small pegs, as shown by these little holes. At the corners, we see gaps where there were probably leather strips now missing. Here, under the turn-ins, is a leather tongue, and you can see remnants of the 4 edges. Endbands are extending onto the board and were in a very bad condition too. The colors seem to be green and brown, but in fact the truth is that the green thread is not a part of the endband, but a thread used to repair the back, as I will soon explain. I found the original colors under the turn-ins: red, green, and beige. There was a primary endband made of tie-downs directly on the lining, and the secondary endband was a waving one, which is a common feather on Syriac bindings. Now, let's take a look to the link stitch sewing, which begins at the backboard and runs along 5 deep V-shaped notches, which are 4 centimeters apart. We can distinguish 2 different threads, which means there have been 2 consecutive sewing in the past. The original thread from the 13th century is about 3 meters long and is a Z twist cotton thread, while the 16th sewing was made with a S twist thread. The sewing was broken at various places, and the consequence is that many quires were detached as well as the backboard. Regarding the spine lining, we can see 3 layers made with 2 pieces of a coarse cotton cloth which covered the spines of the gatherings. The external fabric presented turn-ins at head and tail and covered almost half of the outside wooden boards. The second part of the lining was folded over its entire length, as you can see on this illustration. The green thread I spoke about ran along through this lining. The tabby was very dusty and was broken near the backboard. Sorry for the color. They are not the same on all the pictures because of the lighting. Sorry. The text is written with red and black inks on a thick and smooth paper. We can distinguish 2 different black inks: a brown iron gold ink from the 13th century and a black carbon one from the 16th century for the rewritten text, which is on a different paper. There are many degradations on the papers: stains, wet marks, fading inks, tears, missing areas, and brittle edges. Some areas are damaged by the iron gold ink, and the lines are sometimes abraded. At last, the book block has undergone many repairs in the past. They are made with pieces of different papers, and the spines, you can see here, of the quires are repaired with yellow or gray silk fabric strips. As you can see, the text is always completed on the paper repairs or completely rewritten on new sheets. Now, I would like to share with you the surprises I encountered during the dismantling of the binding, and especially under the spine. I wondered really what the sheepskin back could hide, and it exceeded my expectations. Just under this back, 1 and 2, were the contemporary decorated back of the binding. That was very good news. Beneath, and then a brown fabric of unknown origin, which presents some stitches on one edge with a brown thread. It may correspond to a remnant of the original fabric and leaf. Beneath, even more amazing, a brown leather which extended under the back covering, and at last the old lining. All these elements were crossed all along by the green silk thread, as you can see. Here, you can see holes, and here little holes and a little green thread. It is only later, when I examined the surprising brown leather, that I discovered it was decorated with lines and dots. You can see here this decoration, which is mostly visible in low-angled light and is difficult to interpret. Obviously, this piece of leather comes from an old decorated leather dating before the 16th century. It may correspond to old decoration tests or to an old decorated binding. But despite I have no evidence or proof to say that, I'm hopeful that this decorated leather comes from the original 13th binding. I'd like to emphasize the organization of the different levels found under the sheepskin back, with the green thread crossing through and from them toward the gatherings. I haven't drawn the endband, but if you remember, the green thread went from the head to the tail endband too. So it was a total consolidation of the spine. This repair with this green thread raises many questions. Why not just a simple gluing? Why a stitching just at one place? To be honest, I have no response. I just can tell that this makeshift repair came after the 16th century. Now, let's move on to the restoration. After the disassembly of the binding, the sheets were cleaned and the bifolia were restored with torn Japanese papers and a starch glue, except on the iron gold ink areas, where I used Glossal G. Then the gatherings were reconstituted. The new sewing was made following the former pattern, unsupported length stitch sewing, but with several threads. I started from the backboard and kept the former threads. And to distinguish them, I roped them under a Japanese paper at each station, as you can see on the slide. A new lining has been made like the old one with two pieces of a linen tabby. On the left of the slide, the two photographs show the remnants of a thick thread which was inside the fold of the lining, the second lining. After its restoration, I put it back in its place. It constituted the core for the primary endband. The primary thread is similar to the sewing thread, and after its attachment, it passes through the middle of each gathering, and the tie-downs are used as warps for the secondary endband. Finally, the endband is woven with colored silk thread, and the result is a herringbone on several rows. Here we can see two diagrams presenting the different layers of the bag before and after the restoration. Only the 16th bag is replaced on the book, the brown one. As it was very dry, stiff and brittle, we opted for a double covering. A first leather, in pink, is glued on the board, and the second one is used as a support for the historical back. You can notice that the back is not glued on the spine lining. Now, I can show you the complete decoration of the binding. On Syriac bindings, decoration is mainly blind tooled and sober, made of a geometric pattern. But the Syriac 402 presents a beautiful decoration. On the front cover, decoration, you can see a cross on a step pedestal representing the crucifixion enclosed in a guilloche frame. The cross is surrounded by engraved calligraphic inscription relative to the verse 6 of Psalm 44. On the back cover, under the label, I discovered a vertical rectangle made of a braided work placed in the same frame. It may represent the resurrection according to several historians. The spine, discovered under the sheepskin, presents a decoration with lines. I completed the drawing at the top and the tail from the existing traces. It is essential to know that decorated bags are not a common feature on Syriac bindings. All the remnants are now preserved between two sheets of polyester and are kept in a box with the binding. I forgot to tell you that the typed label is now fixed on an endleaf at the end of the manuscript. To summarize, we can suggest a chronology for the history of the Syriac 402. The main part of the book dates from the 16th century. Only the text block from the 13th century is original. We can't provide a conclusive answer concerning the wooden boards, the bronze fabric, and the old tooled leather, but we still have the hope that the bronze fabric is a vestige of the historical textile and leaves, and that the leather is a remnant of the original covering. To dismantle the covering was a difficult decision, but finally was a chance. The discovery of the 16 bag corresponding to the actual covering, and more surprising, the unveiling of an old tooled leather, maybe the original binding from the 13th century. As I said earlier, decorated bags are not usual on Syriac bindings, so these two discoveries are remarkable for the historians working on Middle East bindings. To conclude, I want to tell you I'm happy to have been able to share with you some of the emotion I felt during this restoration, which required nearly 400 hours of work. Thank you for your attention. Thank you so much.